You guys ready for a podcast?
No.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Tuesday, October 9th, 2018. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
And Slash Film Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
Okay, guys, we have some late-breaking news. Just as we were about to go on and record, it was revealed that James Gunn is, in fact, in talks to write and possibly direct a new Suicide Squad movie, which might be a sequel, might be a reboot. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, so this is sort of surprising news. James Gunn was fired from Guardians of the Galaxy Part 3, or Volume 3, not too long ago. We've talked extensively about that, so you can go back and listen to those previous episodes if you want more details about why. We've talked that whole thing to death. But now news has come out that says that James Gunn might actually write and potentially direct Suicide Squad 2. So he would be making the jump from Marvel to DC. This is, sort of a surprising thing. It's interesting because Suicide Squad was sort of looked at as sort of like the Guardians of the Galaxy, like a B team kind of vibe for the DC cinematic universe. So then they're just going directly to the guy who made Guardians of the Galaxy from Marvel. And we had heard stories previously that Gunn had actually been approached by Warner Brothers for different types of I guess in the fallout of the Disney scandal, all these other studios were coming to him and saying, hey, do you want to direct projects for us? And Warner Brothers was one of them, and we were speculating like, oh, I wonder if he might be actually having conversations with somebody at DC, and it seems like that's actually the case now. I guess since this story was published, now a reporter from The Hollywood Reporter says that he's being told that James Gunn's Suicide Squad will not be a sequel. He will have a whole new take on it, but whether that means it's a total recasting or not is unclear. So it seems like there's still a lot sort of out there right now that we're not entirely sure about. Like, I can't imagine them making a new Suicide Squad movie and getting rid of Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, for example, or even Will Smith as Deadshot, because that was part of the big draw for that movie, because like I said, the characters are not exactly well known. So having an A-list cast was a big part of the reason that Suicide Squad performed so well at the box office. So, Peter, Brad, what do you guys think about this?
Well, when we finally got word that it didn't seem like James Gunn was going to go back to Marvel, that Disney had made their decision final, I think I even said on this podcast that, like, what if Warner Brothers hired him to fix the DC universe and he was, made kind of like the Kevin Feige of DC? I wasn't right in that respect. I don't think even I saw that he would be hired for a Suicide Squad movie. I don't know. It's hard to put my opinion on Suicide Squad aside from the film that we got. I do remember, I think if you guys can, take a time machine in your brain back to before we actually saw the movie, people were actually excited. That trailer at Comic-Con killed. Suicide Squad wasn't necessarily a bad idea. It was just a bad film. The film that resulted was pretty bad. I do think that there could be a good Suicide Squad movie. I am a little disappointed that Gunn maybe is being hired to kind of be the, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but maybe like his more edgy, like what he was before he kind of got into like Guardians of the Galaxy. Brad, what are your thoughts?
This is just really frustrating for me because I feel like this is just going to be like a consolation prize for anybody who loves Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's going to be him bringing those same kind of sensibilities to Suicide Squad, and when it's really just, I just want to see him finish Guardians of the Galaxy because that's what he started, and I want him to finish it. I don't care about Suicide Squad. If he's doing a whole new take on it, then maybe it could be interesting, and he could start to, I don't know, turn over a new leaf for DC. But I'm just still so frustrated, and I have such a bad taste in my mouth with him being fired from Marvel that it's hard for me to give a shit.
I do. I do wonder if they're gonna completely reboot this series. I do know that they've been working on a Suicide Squad 2 for quite some time. I had heard that it was gonna be like a really grounded R-rated movie set in the Middle East. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being a PG-13 movie that's like, some kind of thing that it takes us to space in the DC universe. Like, but maybe that's just the cynical side of me. Ben, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I'm surprised because we've already this project has gone through a bunch of hands already. I mean, we most recently and early this year thought that Gavin O'Connor was hired to direct and I think also write this movie. And just to be clear, we know that Gunn is supposed to be writing this film and just potentially directing, so he might not end up stepping behind the camera for this, but. Even if he just writes a script, I mean, that's got to be a huge win for DC, who is, I mean, I guess to put it lightly, sort of struggling in terms of quality, in terms of their output lately. So, I mean, James Gunn is a guy who definitely has a unique voice, and I see what you're saying, Peter, when you're talking about, like, I wonder if this is sort of a step back into that old James Gunn in terms of like the griminess and the I guess the dirtiness that comes with the Suicide Squad team, because that's a superhero or anti-hero team that you could easily, I mean, David Ayer directed the first film, for God's sake, so it's definitely something that plays well in that dark and grimy sort of dirty corner of the DCEU. It'll be interesting to see what sort of clashing tone that a James Gunn script might bring, especially if you watch those two movies back to back.
And, he hasn't even signed on for this as far as we know. Do you think there'll be outrage from the right? Do you think James Gunn has been officially uncanceled?
I mean, that's I don't know. I feel like I'm walking through a minefield even talking about this, but it seems like to me that there is a large correlation of the same people who were very, let's say, happy to see James Gunn booted from Guardians 3, who also really, really love the DCEU. So I would not be surprised if hypocrisy rules the day and nobody makes a peep about this.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about the box office for this weekend, because we have been talking a lot about A Star Is Born and Venom. We were kind of skeptical of does anybody actually was there anybody out there that was actually excited to see this film? Turns out there were a lot of people. Brad, tell us about it.
Yeah, both A Star Is Born and Venom exceeded the projections and expectations of the box office in their opening weekend. As came as no surprise that Venom topped the box office. It was a bit of a surprise that it ended up breaking in around 80 million for the weekend. And then A Star Is Born was close, not necessarily close behind, but in second place with 42.6 million. Both were above the projections that came out in the week preceding their release. Venom had a much bigger international opening. It added another 125.2 million from the 58 markets that it opened in. Meanwhile, A Star Is Born obviously has a little bit less international appeal because it's not this big superhero comic book, intellectual property. But they landed somewhere in the mid 30 million for the domestic box office, and then 14 million from 31 international markets. So when it comes to the Venom box office, it shows obviously that people were interested in seeing what was going on with this character, largely because it's such an iconic character from the Spider-Man universe. But I find myself wondering whether this is indicative of people wanting Venom and wanting more Venom for the future, or just a matter of a large fan base of comic book fans and blockbuster moviegoers being more curious to see how this movie turned out. The cinema store.
Do you guys think that the reviews for Venom helped the box office? Like, even like the kind of "it's so bad it's good" reaction?
Potentially, but at the same time, the cinema score for this movie was B+, which, in terms of how cinema scores go, isn't necessarily the greatest, because that's basically on par with Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3. Which has its fair share of detractors, both in critics and fans. So it wasn't necessarily, the most loved movie as far as comic book films are concerned, but it definitely wasn't something that was disappointing tons of people either. It seems like people mostly got what they expected from that movie. So it'll be interesting to see how the sequel fares and what fans think of that when it likely comes out.
I feel like there's a pretty small percentage of people out there, Peter, who look at the reviews, see that it says this movie is so bad it's good, and decide, you know what, I'm going to give that a shot because that sounds like it's up my alley. I feel like that's like a lot of our type of people, quote unquote, but not necessarily, like hardcore film fans and people who just love going to the movies all the time, but probably not average audiences.
Yeah, I think that the second weekend numbers will probably give us a better idea of whether or not this is something that has legs or if it's just extremely front loaded and drops really quickly.
Okay, the cynical side of me says, on the other side of the coin, do you think there are a lot of people that are not our audiences, people that are following and are connected to all the goings on in the movie industry, that didn't know that this is not a Marvel Cinematic Universe film, that it's they just came off of Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man and Infinity War? Do you think that may have tricked some general audiences into going into a movie that they didn't know was not part of the MCU?
That's a tough one, because I feel like we're in this onslaught of superhero movies, and like you're saying, sort of general audiences may not know the finer points of who is in what universe and stuff. So I would not be surprised if I feel like my parents might be a little bit more savvy than this, but maybe they, I wouldn't be super surprised if my mom walked into Logan and was like, why didn't Batman show up in that movie or something? You know what I mean? There are a lot of superheroes out right now, and I would not be surprised if most audiences are not in tune with who belongs to what universe.
I did get a message from one of my relatives asking me to explain if Venom is part of the Avengers. So
yeah, exactly. That sounds right.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to a new study that shows that kids want more female superheroes and sci-fi role models. Ben, you wrote this up for the site. What do we know?
Yeah, so BBC America and the Women's Media Center jointly published a new study on the impact of representation in sci-fi and superhero storytelling, and this is particularly how it pertains to young audiences. And so they surveyed about 2,500 girls and boys ages 10 to 19, and basically came to the conclusion that every demographic group surveyed expressed a desire for more female heroes in the sci-fi and superhero genre, with girls, especially girls of color, and also boys of color, most likely to want more sci-fi superheroes who look more like them. So this is basically just sort of reinforcing ideas that we have known have been floating around for a long time, namely just that representation matters, and especially for young kids, having role models that look like them on the big screen is actually directly linked to the way that they think about themselves and their aspirations and life choices and stuff. This stuff actually has a tangible impact on people's lives. It's not just something that you can easily write off. So this new study, which you can read more about in the article at /film, just sort of like I said, reinforces an idea that Hollywood has slowly been catching on to recently.
Yeah, and I think even more interesting to me is in the study the whole confidence in young girls.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just to me, because maybe it's because we are in, we are adjacently in the movie industry. We are outside the system, but we're there. It's interesting to me that movies can have such an impact on us as a whole, as humans.
And just to follow up on what you're saying about the confidence thing, the noteworthy finding from the results of the study was that teen girls are significantly less likely than teen boys to describe themselves as confident, brave, and heard. So the idea that they need more female characters in their sci-fi and superhero storytelling to sort of inspire them and give them a voice to look up to and a persona to emulate is very important.
Yes. And it's a good story to follow this up with. We've talked about in the past the possibility of a female James Bond. According to the producers of the James Bond franchise, that will never happen. Brad, what do we know?
Yes, producer Barbara Broccoli, or Broccoli, however you pronounce her name. It looks like broccoli, so that's how I'm going to say it. She's been a longtime producer of the James Bond franchise, and recently she was talking to The Guardian about the potential directions the franchise might take once Daniel Craig is finished. And discussion inevitably turned to the possibility of having a woman take over the mantle of James Bond. And without hesitation, she simply said, Bond is male. He's a male character. He was written as a male, and I think he'll probably stay as a male. And that's, not really a surprising stance to take. This is one of those things where, James Bond is an iconic character. It's been established that it's not a moniker that a different person takes on each time. When an actor takes on the character of James Bond, they're playing a different version of that character, but it is still a character that was created with the idea of this being a male secret agent. And it's hard to disagree with her, especially when she follows it up with, let's just create more female characters and make the story fit those female characters. And I think that that's exactly the attitude we need to have about something like this. You shouldn't have to take a popular male character and change it to a woman to try and appease female audiences like that. Like, you need to make female characters that work on their own, stand on their own, and turn those into iconic characters. I feel like it would be doing a disservice to female audiences, people looking for that strong female character, to take just a male character and turn that character into a woman. There are so many things about James Bond that are inherently male anyway, And so it's one of those things where it's much better to, just continue the adventures of, Charlize Theron in Atomic Blonde, and, movies like that. Like, that's what we need more of, instead of just, gender swapping some of the more popular characters, I think.
Yeah, but it would be cool to see maybe them introduce a, quote unquote strong female character, in the Bond franchise who could, actually hold a spin-off. Like, you look at the Mission Impossible franchise, and I would love to see a film following Rebecca Ferguson's character. And I don't really think there's any characters in.
I think in Skyfall they definitely gave Moneypenny a solid role where she was in the field with Bond, but then decided. Yeah, but
would you want to see a film, like a standalone film with her?
I would love to follow Naomi Harris as an agent in the field as Moneypenny, but at the same time, I don't feel like I don't think we need to be riding those coattails. I think that new characters need to be created instead.
Yeah. You definitely make a good point there. Casting on Rian Johnson's next film is heating up, and we've been reporting on it over the last week. We haven't gotten to much of it on this podcast, so I thought we'd do a roundup of all the casting and what we know of Rian Johnson's next film. Ben, tell us about it.
Yeah, so Rian Johnson's new movie is called Knives Out, and it is a murder mystery sort of in the vein of old classic Agatha Christie novels and stories. And Rian Johnson has been working on this. He's been sort of kicking around the idea for how he would do his version of a classic whodunit murder mystery for about 10 years now. And he finally cracked it, and I think this past summer, or maybe it was last summer actually, he wrote the script, and this project has really sort of come out of nowhere. And when we first talked about it, we knew that Daniel Craig was on board to star. And recently we've learned that a bunch of new names have come on board as well. And the cast of this is really exciting. I'm super stoked for this film. So we know that Chris Evans is playing one of the roles. We're not sure who he's going to be playing because, as you can expect with a movie like this, especially something like a murder mystery, we're not entirely certain, what the characters are. We know that Lakeith Stanfield from Sorry to Bother You is going to be involved as well. And the only bit of information that we know in terms of who the characters, what types of characters these people are playing, is we know that Daniel Craig and Lakeith Stanfield are going to be playing detectives in the movie. So that's pretty awesome. And then the most recent addition is that Michael Shannon is on board as well. So I think a report has gone around saying that there's probably 4 to 5 other key roles that are left, that remain to be filled for this film. I am kind of hoping that some of them are filled with female characters, because it's sort of a dude fest at this point. And in the vein of movies like Murder on the Orient Express and then there were none and things like that. These casts are often like sprawling, diverse casts of a bunch of different types of people gathered in one location to, like basically trapped in one location in order to make the mystery more compelling. Who is it, why, what are their motivations, that kind of thing. So I'm so excited for this movie. It's definitely one of my most anticipated films of 2019 so far. It would have been even if it was just a new Rian Johnson movie, and let alone a murder mystery, which is a genre that I love, and then with people like Chris Evans and Daniel Craig and Michael Shannon and Lakeith Stanfield. I mean, that is a killer cast right there.
Yeah, the casting on this film is insane, and I'm so excited for it. But let's move on to another story, and that is that Vudu is another one of those companies working on an original streaming service, but they're teaming with MGM to create original shows. Brad, what do we know?
So for those of you who don't know, Vudu is Walmart's streaming video service. You've probably encountered it because it's one of those services where you can have your library of digital copies of movies that you own, whether they came with Blu-ray or if you bought them from Vudu through Walmart or something like that. But a lot of people seem to not know that they also have this ad-supported streaming service called Movies on Us, which is basically like a version of Netflix, but that has commercials interspersed between movies and TV shows.
You're making that up, Brad. I've never heard of that in my life.
I use Vudu, and I've never even heard of that.
The only reason that I was vaguely familiar with it is because if you haven't used Vudu in like a certain period of time, when you go back into the app, like that's the first thing that comes up, and it says like new movies on us, and like it's free, and the library constantly changes. Like right now they have like over 3,000 movies that you can watch with commercials, obviously, and they also have 262 full seasons of TV shows. So they have a lot of content there, but it's just not necessarily as appealing because it all has commercials. It's like watching stuff on Hulu without except you're not paying for to have the ads go away. So that's what Vudu is mostly known for the digital copies, but now they're trying to amp up this movies on Us feature because they're teaming up with MGM to develop original shows based on MGM's intellectual property. The only problem that I see with this is that a lot of the franchises that MGM owns and produces are things that are either already have active TV shows or franchises, or things that don't necessarily seem ripe for original content. So like MGM has the
you don't think there's going to be a Rain Man movie?
There already is a Rain Man movie. It's perfect. It won Best Picture. Don't touch Rain Man. But no, they have James Bond. They have Rocky. They have RoboCop. They have the Pink Panther. They have The Hobbit. They have 21 Jump Street. And then on the TV side of things, they have Fargo. They have The Handmaid's Tale. They have Get Shorty, Teen Wolf, Vikings, Stargate, SG-1. So like all those that I've rattled off, like a lot of them already have projects in the works, or they've already spun off into new things, or they were rebooted fairly recently, or they're still on. So I just don't know what the draw is here, and like exactly what kind of content they're going to create it based on MGM's franchises.
I mean, I could see like maybe a War Games TV series, like not a good one.
I think they've already done that, right? Like we talked about.
But did they do a TV series? I know they've done
they did that interactive series.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. The interactive series that forgettable.
Obviously made a real big impression.
Yeah, I wonder because even some of the franchises you mentioned, like The Hobbit, I don't think they own the rights to that franchise, even though they made movies. Yeah, I'm really curious because looking at the list of titles on the MGM roster, I don't know, like maybe Legally Blonde the series?
Or they could go all the way back to the beginning and make like an updated version on the Thin Man, because that came out in like the 1930s, and I mean that franchise turned into a huge thing for MGM way back in the day. But obviously people haven't. There hasn't been a recent take on that, so maybe they could do something like that they probably own outright, from way back when.
Maybe a new 21 Jump Street, but like, I feel like if they do that, it would have to be completely different from what Phil Lord and Chris Miller created, because I can't imagine a TV series sustaining itself with that kind of vibe. I don't know.
Is it heresy to talk about like a Wizard of Oz TV show?
I mean, yes.
Because in this day,
they already have isn't there a Wizard of Oz animated series at Warner Brothers? I only know that because when I drive by the Warner Brothers studio lot, there's a mural on one of the sides of the sound stages. But there have been, I mean, I guess, but you're saying like a live action TV series based on that classic?
Yeah, because IP rules the day right now, especially for streaming services. And you've got Amazon going all out with Lord of the Rings. You've got everybody's trying to fill the gap of Game of Thrones as soon as that leaves. And going back to, I mean, it would definitely be expensive, but it would certainly turn some heads. So I don't know. I'm not saying that I would be excited about it or anything, but I would not be surprised if something like that happened.
What about the return of the Pink Panther?
Yeah.
Does anybody from this generation even know about the Pink Panther other than that animated character?
Yeah, I feel like
everyone loved the Steve Martin versions.
I completely forgot about those. I feel like I just turned 33, and I feel like I'm just on the cusp of people who barely knew what that was, when I was growing up. I think anybody younger than me probably has no idea what you're talking about, Peter.
I mean, I do like how TV shows are now adapting movies into kind of like season-long anthology stories and then going from there. So what about the possibility of like Poltergeist as a TV show?
Yeah, I could see that. Like a family drama where the supernatural action plays out slowly over the course of the season.
Or how about Barbershop? Okay, I think we're getting too far here. I'm curious to see what IP they put into the service, and if we ever even hear of this streaming service ever again. Because Brad, I honestly don't even think that service that you mentioned exists, because I have not heard it.
There already was a Barbershop TV series, wasn't there?
Was it really?
I thought so. Maybe I'm wrong. No.
I'm Googling this right now.
It was a Showtime show.
Really?
Wow.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, I don't have Showtime, so I didn't. That probably was just not on my radar.
It looks like it only lasted for a season.
Yeah. So it was a bad idea, is what you're saying.
Maybe.
Okay, let's move on to our final story, and that is that Netflix is launching a production hub in New Mexico, a $1 billion investment, which is kind of a huge snub to California, because they said that they were planning on making all their future shows in California. So, Brad, tell us about it.
Yes, New Mexico has become a smaller production hub, if you will, where some movies and TV shows have gone to shoot there. There's a whole studio called ABQ Studios, where shows like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul have been using for years. Movies like Logan and Independence Day Resurgence have shot there. And now Netflix is in final talks to buy that whole facility that is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Their plan is to turn it into their own basically operating movie studio, and they'll be using it to shoot some of their programs like Daybreak, Chambers, and Messiah. And the latter two have actually already been produced in New Mexico, so now they'll just have a more centralized home in Albuquerque in order to keep shooting there. And this plan is huge, too, because New Mexico Governor Susana Martinez apparently said that Netflix is bringing $1 billion in production to New Mexico over the next 10 years and could give the city as many as 1,000 new jobs. So it's a big thing for Netflix to be buying their own studio to make their own stuff. And it does seem a little bit odd that they're going outside of Los Angeles, but Deadline notes that there's kind of a fight for space in Los Angeles right now because I guess a lot of tech companies and startups are taking the space that would normally be reserved for production companies and studios. So there's just not as much space as there used to be to shoot movies and do all the normal production business that Hollywood tends to do in Los Angeles.
Yeah, they've been even shooting stuff all the way out in Santa Clarita, which for people that don't know Los Angeles, that's like a hike. That's over an hour out of the city. Brad, you have been to this facility in Albuquerque, right?
Yeah, and I went there twice, actually. I went there for a set visit for The Last Stand with Arnold Schwarzenegger and for the Independence Day sequel.
And I've been there as well. It's actually kind of like a lot of the Hollywood studios were built a long time ago, and yes, they've been renovated. But these new studios that have been built relatively recently in the last decade, like the one in Albuquerque, there's one in Atlanta, they are like state of the art. And everything's new, and it's actually kind of like, I guess you'd call it like the Apple Store of movie studios, if you can call it that, because essentially it's just big, grand warehouses. But so it makes sense that that Netflix would want to, find a studio that has all those like amenities and all those like technological options. My worry here is. And as someone who watches Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, Albuquerque has a very specific look to it, and it's very hard to capture other parts of the world outside of desert and what Albuquerque looks like, and it's good for like a show like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul that take place in Albuquerque. And of course, you can build anything inside of a soundstage, but you can't shoot everything inside of a soundstage. You got to shoot some things in practical locations. So my worry is that all Netflix shows will eventually look like they were just shot in some desert in Albuquerque.
I feel like this is one of many for Netflix. I can't believe that this is going to be the only place that they buy. I think I don't know if they're going to have the ability, even with the money that they have to throw around, to buy a production facility like this in LA, because like Brad was talking about, I mean, there's so many, for God's sake, we were just talking about Vudu making original shows. So like, somebody has to rent the space to make all that content, and LA is really busy right now. But I have to imagine that Netflix has their sights set on multiple places. So I don't think it's going to be a case of every Netflix show looking the same.
There's one up in Michigan that they could buy. When I was there for Transformers: The Last Night, there's this whole like state-of-the-art new production facility up there that Michigan.
They used it for Oz the Great and Powerful as well.
Yeah, and they used it. I think they used it for the previous Transformers movie as well. So they used it for some big movies, and this was like during the time when Michigan was offering these big tax breaks to production companies and studios to shoot movies there, and then all of a sudden, like I think the tax breaks went away, and so it wasn't quite as popular anymore. And so they have this huge facility and all this space, and it's not being used very much. So Netflix should go up to Michigan and buy that facility.
Yeah. Last I heard, some film schools were going out to those facilities and using them for film school because no Hollywood productions were coming out there, which is kind of sad that tax breaks can just change everything. But yeah, I don't know. As someone who lives in Los Angeles and loves walking on those movie studio lots, and I just wish there was more movie and television production happening here, and all the tax breaks are taking the production elsewhere, and the state is not, giving those incentives as much as they should. But, yeah, we'll have to see. Ben, I think you're right. I mean, Netflix is producing way more productions than can fit at one, studio in whole. Mm-hmm. So I think it's not going to be like everything looks like Albuquerque. But, yeah. Anyways, that brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. Brad, where can people find your work online?
Always slashfilm.com. Also Twitter at Ethan_Anderton. And my podcast, Go Flix Yourself, on iTunes and other podcasting platforms.
Ben, where can we find you?
You can find me at slashfilm.com as well, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ben Pears.
You can find me at SlashFilm on all social media. You can find this podcast, Slash Film Daily, published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps, alongside slashfilm.com. Send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns at peter@slashfilm.com. That's peter@slashfilm.com. And please go rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.